Hello, and welcome to the first Global Fleet Champions webinar of 2019. Global Fleet Champions is a partnership campaign administered by Break, the road safety charity, to prevent deaths, injuries and pollution caused by vehicles driven for work.
More than 1.3 million people die on roads every year. Many road deaths involve a vehicle being driven for work. Sometimes the vehicle was old or broken, or its driver was tired or speeding. Vehicles being driven for work also cause pollution. Global Fleet Champions is a campaign to stop crashes and pollution caused by at-work vehicles. Everyone can be a fleet champion. The boss who cares about managing safety and spreads important messages about road safety in their community. The driver who asks their boss to put safety first. The campaigner who calls for good fleet policies to make roads safer. Global Fleet Champions celebrates the world's best fleets and gives you the tools to be a fleet champion too. Join us at globalfleetchampions.org.
To learn more about the campaign and what we do, please visit globalfleetchampions.org. Today's webinar, sponsored by Mixed Telematics, will help you understand how to respond to serious road crashes in an effective, timely and compassionate manner. On your screen now, you should be able to see a multiple choice question poll so we can find out your views. It is anonymous, simply select one answer and press confirm, and we will discuss the results at the beginning of the Q&A session, which is your opportunity to ask some of today's presenters a question. You can put forward your questions at any time during the webinar by using the chat box on the webinar panel. Thank you for your time, and the webinar will now begin.
Thanks for joining today's webinar. I will be presenting a checklist of best practice that I've built up over time based on good and bad experiences. I'm Andrew Spence-Walrich. If you do disagree with any of the points or are practicing any I've missed, please do let me know. So why is it important? Road crashes are an inevitable risk and very few fleet organisations can boast a zero incident claims history. Unfortunately, I've experienced 3 fatalities in my career, all of which have led to serious thoughts on prevention and aftercare. So whether the driver or the fleet organisation is found to be at fault or not, your objective is to manage the welfare of your drivers and their families and carry out effective incident management processes. Failure to implement an effective pre and post crash approach can result in serious long and short-term consequences. So the consequences of a crash or a failure to effectively manage a crash situation can result in delays in treatment or response due to a lack of clarity on contacts, reputational damage both internally within your organisation and externally, your operation potentially being held liable in the event of a crash, of course, whatever insurance excess you've agreed with your insurers and the impact that you have on your premium subsequently, uninsured losses that can be quite significant, and finally a loss of an order or customer confidence in your organisation. So how do you address the problem? Best practice would be to develop a robust road risk management strategy, which would include rapid response training to prevent death and serious injury, post-crash support to drivers and other victims, and post-crash analysis. So firstly, you do need to have a plan. In the event of a road crash, it's vital to have emergency response procedures in place to reduce the risk of death or serious injury. So examples of this are, of course, immediately notifying the emergency services, doesn't always happen, alerting the fleet office immediately after calling emergency services, establishing an external support network. So for example, what recovery services would you use? Who would you call? Have you got the numbers handy? And are you set up as a customer indeed? You need to let your broker and your insurer know very quickly because they can take action to support the third party straight away if necessary. You need to regularly update your driver's emergency contacts. These can be changing all the time, so you need to make sure that they're accurate and accessible. And that includes out of hours, of course. And have you identified in advance what support your own fleet can offer in a crash, depending on the geographical location? So these systems should be tried and tested to determine how quickly you can respond in the event of a crash. And you know, I would treat it just like a fire drill, effectively. So at the scene, remember, in the event of a crash, drivers are very likely to be in shock and traumatized. and will need a friendly face to be with them as soon as possible. A driver should not admit liability. We all know that, but it's worth reminding the drivers of that. And most importantly, they should not be giving a statement to the police without a solicitor present. They can sometimes be drawn into saying things that they've misremembered or don't mean to say. So a driver does need to be taken to a safe space, whether it's home, depending on where the incidents occurred, or a hotel. Please don't just leave them to fend for themselves. And they do need to be accompanied or visited in hospital if appropriate until alternative arrangements have been made with the family. I would always notify the driver's emergency contact as soon as possible. The driver may not wish you to do this, and in fact I've had an issue with a driver asking me not to do this, but they're not likely to be in the best frame of mind to decide, and you will be thanked by the family afterwards, I can assure you. So in terms of supporting your drivers, then you need to be taking responsibility for communicating with, and this is the important list, the driver, emergency services, family, insurers, emergency recovery staff, internal staff, media, and potentially the customer. So question would be, have you got incident managers that have been appointed, allowing for holidays, sickness, etc.? They will need training. You must rehearse as per my fire drill point, and they need to be guaranteed to be on call and available to provide the necessary support when ready. So are the details of the emergency call out available to drivers, particularly out of hours? And have all of your drivers got an ICE in case of emergency contact in their phone, in case they're not able to communicate with you at the time? In terms of driver training, then rapid response can save lives and prevent serious injuries. And there's a number of things you can do as far as internal driver training goes, which can highlight, for example, the effective use of your DCPC for truck drivers. You have to do 7 hours every year, 35 every 5 years. Use that time well. So that could be used to cover immediate post-crash actions. First aid, there are some good courses on first aid that can be rolled out to drivers. How drivers can protect themselves at the scene of an incident. How the driver can recognise driver fatigue and what they do in that event. How to deal with vulnerable road users, and how to avoid dangerous behaviours that can result in a crash. So there are, again, some good courses around defensive driving and driver behaviour. One thing I would recommend strongly is that you establish an occupational health programme and see this as an investment. A robust, forward-thinking health programme can be an effective means of engaging with your drivers. They do like it. They might be suspicious initially, but actually they appreciate it. And you can roll that out as well, I might say, to fitters and other office staff. It helps improve drivers' awareness of the impact of driving under the influence of prescribed and over-the-counter medication. You should have an annual health questionnaire, and don't forget new starters immediately after joining. You can't always get this information when drivers apply for a job due to disability health discrimination, so make sure you've got that covered as soon as they start. We need to be encouraging drivers to self-report their issues. They'll do that more when they see positive outcomes, and handle the matter positively in order to reduce the risk in the event of a road crash. So when you are carrying out such a scheme, then you do have to think in advance, what do you do in the event of identifying a problem in relation to suspension, in pay. You can get drivers back to work quickly. I certainly have had problems identified through this screening program with drivers with high blood pressure and on medicines prescribed over the counter that are causing potential issues. So costs might be £400 to £500 a day, get through as many drivers as you can, or maybe £50 to £75 if you're sending a driver to an external resource when he's available. So in terms of post-crash response, good checklist here. You do need to agree, it depends on the seriousness of the event, of course, but you need to agree an immediate appointment of a solicitor with your insurer. You need to collate any data that you've got available from your tracker, tacho, camera, etc. Get your maintenance and defect records ready so that they're there when you need them. You do need, of course, to carry out the investigation with the driver when he or she is ready, but only when he or she is ready. No point doing it too soon after the event, because you won't get a good result. One good tip: any written investigation report must be endorsed subject to legal privilege. You can check and agree this with your insurer in advance of any issue, but it prevents anything being used against you that the driver may have said or been unclear in what he said. So keep that one in mind. The solicitor should meet with the driver as soon as they are able, and the solicitor should be the point of contact for the police. Leave your insurer to be the contact with any third parties. I would recommend that you offer counselling to the driver. This can be done by telephone or one-to-one if the driver needs it. It's very beneficial. Witnesses also that are interviewed as part of the investigation may also need support and counselling. A driver clearly shouldn't be returning to work until they believe they are able. Don't push it. And once willing, they do need to be accompanied by a mentor or a trainer for as long as it takes until they are signed off. Don't just take their word for it that they're okay. And then once they're back on the road, you should be following that up just to double check to make sure there's no delayed impact or any post-traumatic stress. Investigations should be thorough. They should be carried out at a senior level and root causes should be identified. Investigation conclusions should be agreed with your broker, insurer, underwriter, and any actions resulting should be shared with the relevant staff internally. External support should be brought in if you haven't really got anyone that's capable of carrying out that investigation thoroughly enough. So technology, we're all using it to a greater or lesser extent depending on the age of your vehicle, but they can be used very effectively in advance of any incident or at the time to identify any dangerous driving behaviours, e.g. speeding and harsh braking. So if you see that, pick it up with the driver, review the footage when the alert's received and at the time of any crash. It can be a good way of eliminating any non-relevant issues. You can see if there's any potential driver fatigue issues, whether the driver's not using his mirrors correctly, whether he's distracted by mobile phones, electronic devices, eating, drinking, smoking, etc. And you can also see whether he's wearing a seatbelt. Of course, this does depend on the cameras you've got. I really must say that everyone should have forward-facing cameras. Inward-facing cameras are becoming more common now. Highly recommended, very useful to see what's going on in the cab. I know some are wary that they would not be able to get agreement from the drivers to introduce these, but it can be done if you engage with the drivers properly. 360-degree cameras, they can be useful. Not many people would fit them after the event, but they are a requirement for silver or gold. The in-vehicle monitoring systems, of course, in terms of driver score, in terms of their behaviour, can be useful. Just a point, new starters do need proactive monitoring. You might give them the best induction in the world, but are they actually following that behaviour? And it's useful if you can pick that up if they're not straight away. So in terms of analysing the data, last slide, the information you've gathered can be used to carry out your incident review, identify repeat or unusual behaviours that can be an indicator of a wider issue. So even small events should be checked because if you can deal with them at the time, they might stop something bigger happening. Occasionally, you do need to discuss with the driver at HR level because there may be a welfare or mental health issue that isn't likely to be picked up at a disciplinary. Please do complete maintenance supplier audits. If you're having MOT failures, then you need to be alert to that and identifying what the problem is and rectifying that. And yes, you should be checking whether drivers are reporting defects because that is something that is picked up by the traffic commissioner if you're not doing that properly. So fleet managers, they do need to ensure that staff are trained out to carry out an effective investigation. Investigations are signed up at a senior level, that there is an effective TACO infringement management system in place. Near miss reporting is happening, and you should have a SHE committee, and all reports, near misses should be followed up and the results circulated. So I hope that's a useful checklist. As I said at the beginning, if there's anything you think I've missed or anything you don't agree with, please do let me know. Have a good day.
Today, we're hoping to prepare you for the thing you hope may never happen, a collision involving an employee. We will be considering all those who might be affected, including family, friends, colleagues, and we will illustrate how important it is to have procedures in place to support all who may be affected. This quote, which is headed Post-Crash Support, comes from an organisation set up in 1991 called Disaster Action. And bereaved and survivors who were involved in several major disasters in the UK set this up because they needed to express their anger and distress at the way they'd been treated. We learned a great deal by listening to their voice. And there are many examples of that. Now we need to continue to use the lessons learned to ensure that those injured and bereaved in road traffic collisions do not suffer additional stress and distress as a result of lack of knowledge and understanding of their rights and needs. We need to always remember that a road traffic collision is a major personal disaster to those involved. Taylor and Fraser were two psychologists in 1981, and they produced these categories to describe those who may be affected by a traumatic incident. Those who were directly involved, as you can see, will clearly suffer reactions, as will family and friends. And these are likely to be the main groups that you will offer support to. We now recognise that rescue and recovery personnel are affected by their work, but that's not a subject for today. That second level of victims is the community. And it's important that employers understand the impact on the community. But what is a community? Is it a village? Is it a town? Your company, large or small, is a community. Each individual office is a community. Those sharing a shift or a canteen will be a community, and as such may show signs of distress. I was called some years ago to a factory in the north of England when one woman was killed whilst handling volatile materials. So many of her friends and colleagues wanted to talk to me about their feelings of loss and sadness. And for many, this new loss triggered memories of past losses in their own lives and feelings that were often unresolved. The company recognised this and were willing to allow them the opportunity to express their feelings. This was a caring and compassionate employer. For similar reasons, the last two groups may need support, although they may find it harder to ask for help as they were not directly involved. So you need to be vigilant as to how your staff are reacting. An understanding employer should have procedures in place to recognise when staff need support and will ensure that these groups feel they're able to request support. What do those affected need? All on these lists are of course variable. Each individual will react differently. But you see the sorts of questions that I've had asked of me so many times. People want to know what happened, how did it happen, who was hurt and killed, and so on. Most of this information is a key need. The employee and the family will be kept informed by the police. And sadly, if there is a fatality, a police family liaison officer will be deployed to assist the bereaved and answer their questions as far as is possible. What about all the others we've mentioned? Many will want to be kept informed, especially if they knew the person who was hurt or killed, or if they're trying to maintain core business and need to understand the likely impact on the company. Clearly, personal information cannot be shared, but it's wise to keep staff informed of the situation as far as is appropriate in order to reduce speculation and rumour. However, information must never be shared without agreement of the police. It must always be accurate and relevant. Practical needs. It's in this area that the employer can be of real assistance. In the event of death or injury, financial necessities initially take second place, but soon there will come a time when financial and practical needs must be met. As an employer, it may be possible to remove some of the worries about finance, etc., which then allows those affected to focus on more pressing issues. However, the costs of provision of this assistance may be high, especially if there's more than one casualty, and the employer must have plans in place to manage such a situation. Even large companies have budgets and auditors who will monitor outgoing costs. In my experience, it's the knee-jerk reaction is in the aftermath of an incident to be very generous and want to help, and then it's difficult to keep that up. It's vital that any assistance is realistic in the long term, as it would not be acceptable to withdraw help once offered. So here we come on to something called trauma, something we've all heard about. We hear the word trauma frequently, but happily few of us experience a real traumatic event, as described here by Professor Gordon Turnbull. The effects of a traumatic event can be far-reaching, even for those who are on the periphery, and we call this the ripple effect. I believe 100% of individuals will have a post-traumatic stress reaction. After the trauma, they will have some distressing reactions. Those less affected are likely to recover without wanting anything more than a listening ear and an understanding response, something you can offer as a company and as managers. However, not everyone will be able to achieve this outside of the workplace. If counselling is eventually required, it's crucial that trauma-trained counsellors are made available. Not all counsellors are experienced in treating trauma, and I've seen some difficult situations arise as a result of that. Equally, it's important that a longer-term response for some individuals is from trauma psychologists. Again, psychologists need to be trauma-trained. And eventually, there are those who may be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. It is a clinical disorder, as described in previous slide, and it will need, again, specialist intervention. So what reactions might you see, hear, be aware of if you are being vigilant and watching how your staff are reacting? You see the list here of physical reactions. Many of them are very similar to stress-related reactions too. This is a higher level of stress. And some of these reactions are visible, some you'll be able to see, but whether they're visible or not, all are very frightening. Behaviour changes. Again, any changes should be noted as it may be indicative of inner struggles. Anger and aggression, poor functioning at home and at work, and this will be noted. Isolation and withdrawal, not doing things that they normally enjoy doing, not joining in with the team or sitting on their own at lunchtime. Difficulties in sleeping you may not know about, but any sort of increased use of substances and alcohol will be evident. Psychological responses, again, very similar, feeling pressured and worrying. Even the most effective and competent employee may find it difficult to function when experiencing some or all of these reactions. It's very frightening, that feeling of being overwhelmed. However, post-traumatic stress disorder that we commonly hear of PTSD, 25 to 30% of people experiencing a traumatic event may go on to develop PTSD. This seems like quite a lot. However, the good news is, if you look at that the other way, is that 70 to 75% will not go on to develop full-blown PTSD. And these figures came from a study in the months after the 7th of July bombings in London. The provision of caring support and an understanding employer will have a positive impact on staff morale and eventual recovery. Professor Gordon Turnbull, quoted earlier, talks about the stages in PTSD developing. And the final one, the way in which people are treated after the event can affect their full recovery or their ongoing recovery. So what can you do? A post-trauma support programme is cost effective. It can be discussed and decisions made in advance of any incident, when you can sit calmly around a table and consider all these points. This reduces stress for those managing the impact and is extremely helpful to those suffering in its aftermath. Prepare staff that these things can happen, enable effective and timely support, and in heightening the awareness and acceptance of reactions will help people to understand what's happening. A post-trauma support programme is easy to set up, but it does require senior management being on board, all measures signed off in place to support those affected. No arguments when something happens. It should be in place. A written policy with realistic resourcing. The purpose of the post-trauma support plan is raising awareness of the support programme, make sure it's known about, make sure it's within the company policy so that everyone is aware of it. It ensures that staff feel supported, minimises short-term distress, and facilitates a safe and effective return to the workplace. Why is it required? The educating of employees and management about the effects of trauma and how to give day to day. This is also useful when that people have losses within their own families, in a private family, and the staff will know how to support them through that. A post-trauma support plan will discharge the duty of care to employees, and you will be seen as a caring employer. It also fulfills legal responsibilities and minimises future liabilities. So what do we recommend? Select staff within the company who can be trained to support colleagues. This isn't as hard as it sounds. A lot of staff within a company will have private skills, private knowledge, private experience in their own lives, which may be of assistance. Minimum training can raise awareness of post-collision reactions and enable them to provide appropriate support with all the pluses that we've mentioned. Seek advice from Break. This is a very important recommendation. Break are there and have been for a long time, will have knowledge of any local or national agencies and a fund of other helpful information. There are other agencies too, and you go out there, you talk to people, you find out how best to help when the worst case scenario happens.
Hello, my name is Neil Brazell. I'm a critical care paramedic for Dorset and Somerset Area Ambulance. We are a pre-hospital critical care service based in southwest England. Anywhere at any time a road traffic incident may occur in front of you, or you may be directly involved. This short video will explain some general principles on how to keep yourself safe, how to keep the scene safe, and what initial actions may be performed to provide initial casualty care. We strongly recommend you attend first aid training in your country to learn the full scope of casualty care. On the way back to head office, the driver has seen a pedestrian hit by a car, pulls up a safe distance away, sets their own handbrake, turns the steering wheel away from the incident, and puts the hazard lights on. The driver exits the vehicle and is aware of traffic around, goes to get a high visibility vest, first aid kit and blanket, and has taken his phone with him. The driver approaches the incident on the side furthest from any moving traffic. As the driver passes the vehicle involved, they make sure the handbrake has been set and the driver involved in the incident is okay. They may be in shock or may be able to help by calling the emergency services. Traffic may continue to pass the incident site. If it is possible and safe to do so, ask a passing vehicle to park safely and to help you. For example, calling the emergency services.
Pull up over there and then come over and get that.
Call the emergency services number for your country and explain the situation. They will need to know the exact location, what has been involved, if there are any hazards, for example spilled fuel, chemicals or fire, and what has happened to any casualties. This video will present 4 different potential casualty situations. These are for demonstration purposes only, and we strongly advise that you undertake formal first aid training. Some casualties have simple injuries. If they are in pain or cannot be safely moved, make them comfortable, reassure them and keep them warm. Ask about any medical history, medications and allergies, as this information is very helpful to the emergency medical crews. If there is serious bleeding, use a clean, dry cloth or dressing. Apply direct pressure and raise the limb if possible. Keep the patient warm, reassure them, and observe for any deterioration. If a patient appears unconscious, check if they are breathing by a look, listen and feel breath on your cheek. If they are breathing, their airway must be closely looked after. One way of doing this is to gently turn them onto their side, get help if possible, and be careful to keep their neck and back in alignment. Advice may vary between countries and organisations. You should follow your local first aid training. Keep them warm and make sure their condition doesn't get worse. If the casualty is not breathing, then cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, should take place immediately and continue until emergency services arrive. Tell the emergency services this is the situation whilst on the phone. These examples demonstrate a very basic, generalised overview of casualty care. When the emergency services arrive, inform them of the injuries that you have found. Whether the road traffic incident involves cars, motorcycles, bicycles or pedestrians, the key points are: park safely away behind the scene, set your handbrake, turn your wheels, put your hazard lights on, ensure that you're aware of traffic around and make sure that you can be seen, call the emergency services for help, keep casualties warm and reassure them, be prepared for first aid actions. This will be best achieved by attending first aid courses conducted by reputable providers in your country. Thank you for watching.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Bates, and I'm the Marketing Director for Mixed Telematics Europe. I'm here today to support our partnership with Brake to discuss the subject of crisis management, post-crash action and care, the job that telematics can do to help in post-analysis of these types of incidents. So briefly, a little about Mix. We are a company that places safety at the absolute centre of our DNA, and we work globally with organisations like Brake to deliver meaningful information to our customers that help create safer roads. And so we're here to talk today about how telematics can help in the scenario of post-crash action and care. Now, the job of telematics in the scenario post-crash is not to provide opinion or supposition, but rather to deliver factual data in order to clarify situational context. This is achieved by deploying a suite of tools to assist companies in identifying and then filling in the missing pieces of the jigsaw. Today, I'm going to concisely describe three key pieces of this toolkit. The first is the second-by-second data mapping available in the telematics SaaS platform. On a simple to understand and navigable dynamic graph, a user can see the speed and revs per minute of a vehicle on a second-by-second basis. This will show the kinetic behavior of the vehicle mapped to the exact time, showing how the vehicle was behaving. On top of this information, the driver behavior events can be overlaid, showing events such as overspeeding, harsh acceleration, and harsh braking or cornering, meaning that the exact vehicle and driver behavioral situational context can be quickly and factually established. This information is used commonly by our fleet consulting team to support our customers with admissible evidence in a UK court of law to demonstrate post-crash facts. Secondly, camera footage provides an added dimension of context. Dual-facing cameras, in Mixed case known as the Mixed Vision solution, can record both road and driver-facing footage, mapped by date, time, vehicle, driver, speed, and revs data. This information is all available on the SaaS user interface, providing clarity and training tools for driver trainers and HR professionals. Vitally, these tools are provided in order to both establish post-incident facts and support, but also to be a catalyst for positive future change through driver training so that this type of incident never happens again. As you can see from the quote on screen, the information will support drivers and companies with legal challenges post-incident. These cameras can also be fitted outside the vehicles as well. So if they're used in a situational context, such as where there are cyclists or pedestrians, that camera footage can just provide that visual layer of evidence to help companies establish the facts post-incident. Thirdly, it can be very important to understand not just what's happening with the vehicle and the driver, but what's actually happening on the road around where these incidents can occur. Using a tool that we call heat mapping, it's possible to actually plot using all of the different data from our customers across the world and then zoned in on a local level where we see common events happening, such as harsh acceleration or impacts or speeding. And what this allows you to do, if you look at the map on screen now, you'll see the red areas where there's a strong heat concentration will be areas where these events are occurring on a much more regular basis. This can show that there are really some hotspots for incidents happening on a particular road, and it can help establish the risk profile of that particular road. This can help post-incident because it can be used to see exactly if that's a road where these incidents commonly occur. And it can also be helped with future route planning and training, which is vital when an incident does occur to then take the learnings from that and apply them to future planning. This can really help organisations in terms of their driver training, but also their vehicle route mapping. Human causes do represent more than 90% of incident origins. So that's why it's really vital for companies to have a look at both vehicle and driver behaviour, plus the context of what's happening on the routes around, to make sure that after each incident occurs, that the learnings are applied for the future. And the core aim of our safety solution, indeed working together with Brake, is that we want to ensure that every driver, pedestrian, any users of the road go home safely to their families every day. Using the types of tools that we can provide is just one element to making sure that we're taking care of post-incident action and care. Working together with Brake and many other organisations in the UK, we can combine our resources to make sure that we're able to provide the right tools and support to manage these incidents in the best possible way. The data from telematics is really used to understand the root causes and help ensure that incidents don't happen again. I hope that you've been able to learn something from the 3 different areas I've described today, and I look forward to any questions that anyone might have. Thank you very much for your time today, and I shall hand back to the meeting organiser now.
Hello, everybody, and thanks, Brake, for inviting me to come and share my insights onto some of the hidden costs of a crash, which I think maybe you've heard about before today, but also some of the practical solutions that we can put in place to do something about it to help prevent serious collisions from reoccurring in the future. So what are the hidden costs? As I said, you may have heard some of this already today, but I thought I'd share my insights and thoughts on this subject. And I think there's 3 areas to look at. The first is the corporate social responsibility issue. So what's your moral obligations from a fleet operator perspective, whether that's people driving company vehicles, their own vehicles. And I think those organisations who take their corporate social responsibility seriously tend to focus on internal health and safety issues. They tend to look at environmental issues, but sometimes they forget the importance of what's happening on the road with their employees making work-related journeys. And if we look at the global statistics, approximately half of the fatalities that occur on the roads are vulnerable road users. That's pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists. So actually, it's very likely that in a work-related road collision, it's not the employee being injured, actually it's a member of the public. And obviously from a corporate social responsibility perspective, it's incredibly important to focus on that. And those companies who do measure their collision rates, and they do measure their lost time injuries, and they do measure in the worst case scenario any fatalities, those that I've worked with tend to look internally at that. What they're not measuring is how many members of the public are getting injured in the collisions. So from a corporate social responsibility perspective, I encourage everybody to actually look at the bigger picture, not just focus internally. Then there's the legal aspects. Now, it's beyond the scope of the time we've got today to look at the implications of legislation all around the world. But suffice to say is that if you've got some robust management policies and procedures in place, if you audit them and you've got a strong audit trail, then the risk of prosecution is very low. Now, obviously, the consequences of a prosecution are very serious, so make sure you've got those management systems in place. But I think if we're being honest, most people are concerned about the financial implications of when a serious collision has occurred. And I'm going to look at the issue about uninsured losses or hidden costs. So the International Loss Control Institute say that for every dollar, every euro, every pound that an insurance company pays out, there's $8 to $53, euros or pounds in uninsured losses, depending on the severity of the incident. 8 to 53, that's a huge number. Now, I find it difficult to justify that, so I just use a simple 2 times multiplier. So you've got your claims cost, double that, and that's going to give you an indication of the uninsured losses associated with the collisions that you're having. But even that is going to be a big number. Just think about how much your claims costs are every year. Double that, that's a big number. But what are these uninsured losses? What are these hidden costs? Well, when a serious collision occurs, there's a good chance that somebody's going to be off work for some time after the collision. And actually, during that time, they're not being productive. They're not doing what you pay them to do, and there's going to be a financial impact on the business. But as I mentioned earlier, actually, the chances are that it's going to be a member of the public who has been killed or seriously injured in this serious collision. And even if your employee is okay, we shouldn't neglect the psychological impact that it's going to have on that employee. It's going to take them, or could take them, a long time to get over that. And during that time, they're not going to be productive. And there's going to be a financial impact on your organization. But there's other hidden costs as well. It could be late deliveries, lost productivity. You might miss your service level agreements. There's all sorts of uninsured losses, depending, as I mentioned earlier, on exactly the nature of your business. One thing we shouldn't lose sight of is the reputational risk. If there's a serious collision occurred and the media associate your organization with that serious collision, what's the brand damage going to be? What's the reputational risk going to be? And how do you put a pound note, dollar note, euro note figure on that issue? It's something that all organizations should take seriously, and many don't, because by their very nature, uninsured losses don't appear on the balance sheet, so the financial director doesn't get to see them. There's no visibility, but actually they're there and you're hemorrhaging money all the time. So what can we do about it? Well, you've heard already today about some practical solutions. It's important just to have a quick look at what the risk and effective risk management process looks like, because we're talking today about post-collision issues, but actually the whole risk management process is such that we need to be looking at preventing collisions occurring. And today I want to talk about 2 elements of this process, the post-incident reviews and the root cause analysis. Now, the most important, but perhaps most difficult question that you should be asking yourself when a collision's occurred, and especially when a serious collision's occurred, is what have we done as an organization that may have contributed to that collision occurring? It's all too easy to focus on the driver. And the driver may actually be the root cause of why the collision occurred in the first place, but often we don't know. So it's important that we have a look at the wider implications of why the collision occurred. And if you don't do that, you're unlikely to get down to the root causes. And if we don't know the root causes, how can we put something effective in place to prevent reoccurrence? Now, I used to work in the insurance industry, and people used to say, Andy, well, here's our claims history. Tell us why we're having collisions. Claims history, to be honest, don't help. If we take one of the most common types of and high frequent collisions, that's hitting a third party in the rear. So our driver drives into the rear of the vehicle in front. If we look at some of the reasons why that could occur, the driver could be driving too fast, too close, they could be impaired, they could be fatigued, there could be a vehicle defect, a whole variety of reasons of driver error in this situation. But actually underlying that, there could be a whole lot of reasons why operationally the driver is driving like that. They may have to be contactable by phone. They may have an unrealistic service delivery schedule. They may be getting towards the end of the month and not hitting their targets. So there could equally be lots of operational or management reasons that have caused the driver to drive like that and be involved in the collision. And if we don't know that, then we're not going to be able to do anything about it to prevent reoccurrence. Now, the driver debrief is an important part of that process, and actually it's important that happens as soon as possible after the collision's occurred, because our memories are very bad as human beings, and the longer we leave it, the more difficult it's going to be for the driver to actually remember exactly what happened and the circumstances leading up to the collision. So do it as soon as possible, within 24 hours, definitely. If you have to do it by telephone, do it by telephone. Now, we haven't got time to go into the depth of what that collision post-incident review should look like, but it needs to look, as I mentioned before, at potentially operational and management issues, as well as potential driver errors. So management have a number of roles to play in this. In large organizations especially, it's the line manager who should conduct these debriefs, and obviously you need to train the line managers how to do that. But actually, it's the line managers themselves who might be the underlying root cause of why the collisions occurred. They may be putting undue pressure on the driver. So there has to be some sort of governance process in place to make sure that certain departments aren't overrepresented in the statistics, and actually it's the line manager is the root cause of the problem and nothing else. But perhaps more importantly, management have a role in place to then do something about what they find. So that if you get down to the root cause, what do we put in place to prevent reoccurrence? What are the trends in our post-collision debriefs? What do we need to do? What do we need to do at a management level? What do we need to do at an operation level? What do we need to do at a driver level? And make sure these things happen. And also communicate. It's no good doing a good post-collision review, finding some really interesting sort of things about what caused that crash to happen, and then keeping it a secret. Disseminate that throughout the business. But perhaps the biggest role of managers and leaders in an organization is to develop the on-road safety culture, to get drivers to start to recognize that they may not be the best drivers in the world, and to actually create that open and honest atmosphere where you can have an open conversation and you can get down to the root causes of why the collisions, rather than just having the drivers clam up during this post-collision debrief. Now, that's an incredibly easy thing to say, but it takes some time to develop that strong and positive on-road safety culture in a business. So I started off talking about the cost of collisions, and whilst the corporate social responsibility and the potential prosecution issues are important, actually it's the uninsured losses and financial implications of each crash that give businesses motivation to put effective management systems in place that are going to prevent crashes reoccurring. Now, an effective risk management process has many elements, as we saw in the slide earlier, but the two that should be focused on after a serious collision has occurred are the driver debriefs and determining the underlying root causes. And the important thing, and I make no apologies for restating this, is to always look inwardly and see if there's any operational or management issues that might have contributed to the crash occurring. If you only focus on the driver, then you're unlikely in each collision to get to the root cause of why that occurred. And if you don't know what the root cause is, how can you put something in place to do something about it? Management have a crucial role to play in doing the driver debriefs, doing something with the outcomes, and most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, developing that strong on-road safety culture. If you get this right, then not only will there be less collisions in the future, and with that, the enhanced corporate social responsibility and reduced risk of prosecution, but actually the uninsured losses associated with collisions will be reduced, and actually that's going to improve the financial performance of the business. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Glenn Davis, the Ford's technical advisor, here today to present how to write a post-crash policy. When we're writing any new policy document, we open Word, we click New Document, and we're then generally presented with a fleet manager's worst nightmare, the blank page. We write the heading and we wonder, where do I start? Well, first, it's useful to start to understand why we're actually developing the post-collision management policy in the first place. We're actually documenting the organization's top-level commitment to learn from any incidents. People need to know what their responsibilities are. They need to know what actions to take when things go wrong. An investigation should be conducted to identify the causes and any remedial actions to address them. We need to develop intelligence of the main risk areas, and understand why collisions occur. Ultimately, we're aiming to prevent collisions recurring and reduce the number and severity of collisions in the future. In support of any policy, we need procedures. Collision management procedures ensure that people know what actions to take in the event of a collision and when something goes wrong. that a quick and appropriate response to a collision is made. Investigation of collisions is conducted by trained investigators, and remedial actions are made and recommended. And then the analysis of collision data is conducted over time to identify any trends that need to be addressed within the operation. The policy structure, no doubt most organisations will have a policy structure and many other policy documents, but it should cover the purpose and ultimate aim of the document. What are we trying to achieve? Its scope and who in the organisation that this document is relevant to. The actual policy statement itself, the published statement of intent, preferably from the chief executive or the managing director, i.e. the very top. The different roles and their responsibilities from the top level all the way through the organisation to the drivers, and the different processes and procedures that support the policy, such as the driver actions at the scene, all the way through to the full investigation. And finally, just making sure that you know that this is not a standalone document itself. It does interact with other documents in the organisation, so we need to reference across where it does. So the document should include the roles and responsibilities of individuals within the organisation. The senior manager has responsibilities to ensure that the policy is published and it's communicated effectively across the whole of the organisation. They should also ensure that staff are resourced, they're trained, and they're powered to act on the policy. And they ensure that any other policies within the organisation, that anything else that's related, are consistent with this particular collision management policy. At the middle manager level, fleet managers should be conversant with all of the collision management policy, process and procedures. It's their job to ensure that the drivers are aware of their responsibilities and their collision management duties. Post-collision process, it's the fleet manager's job is then to make sure that the driver is fit and deemed competent before they return to their driving duties, and that the vehicle is legal and roadworthy before it returns back to the fleet. The driver has responsibilities. The walk-around check, generally there for roadworthiness of the vehicle, but from a collision perspective, it's the driver's job to work out whether the vehicle has had any incidental damage prior to that driver taking over the vehicle. Historical damage on a vehicle, and if we turn a blind eye to historical damage on a vehicle, can foster a careless culture. Driver's job to drive carefully and responsibly in accordance with the company policy and the highway code, of course. But then in the event of a collision, to follow the post-collision immediate actions and making sure they make the scene safe, that they get the vital information that they need to from that particular incident, and then follow any direction from police officers or the authorities. And finally, to complete the post-collision documentation, it's their job as well. They have a documented process and they should participate openly in an investigation. One of the final responsibilities of the collision investigator, an extremely important role, quite often is overlooked in its competence within the fleet management, but it's their job to conduct that post-collision investigation, determine the direct and underlying causes. Was it a lapse? Was it an error? Or was it a violation? And also, was there any other contributory factor? Why did that incident occur? And it might not have been the last decision out on the road. It could have been something that contributed to it well before that. It's their job to make recommendations, and those recommendations may be administrative. They may identify a development need, or they could even be disciplinary. And finally, they need to log the data, log in consistently data to enable trend analysis over time. A one-sized approach doesn't necessarily fit all, and the actions should be proportionate to the severity of the collision. However, we shouldn't necessarily merely accept a culture of damage-only collisions. Damage-only collisions still do demonstrate that there has been either a lapse, an error, or a violation in some way. So we do need to start addressing them before they turn into something more serious. The job isn't finished until the paperwork is done, and we need to ensure that we document the full process. Stage the process to make sure we've got all that documentation. Stage 1, the at-scene collision report. This is completed by the driver as soon as it's safe to do so. This may also include the first notice of loss to the insurer. Stage 2, this is a neat version of the driver's report done back at base, where the driver transcribes all the information in a legible format onto a neat copy, but also then fills in any information gaps that may have not been done at the side of the road. Stage 3, quite often overlooked, the manager's post-collision report. Other information will inform the investigation process, and the manager will know how the driver has been tasked that day, what pressures we were under with regard to the operation. We will also understand the background to the driver's history, the driver's training and development needs, camera footage on the vehicle, the driver training records, the driver's hours record, all make a contribution to build up the picture for the collision investigation. And that brings us to stage 4, the collision investigation itself. Completed by the trained collision investigator, seeks to verify those facts and identify the causes. There are some supporting procedures. Company procedures do interact with each other, and the post-collision process is no different. Typical supporting procedures include professional development and training. How do we ensure our people are competent to conduct their duties? Return to work and occupational health. How do we ensure drivers are fit for the road before they return to the road? Communication and possibly media handling. How do we communicate both internally and externally? And then performance management. What performance metrics are in place? How are we measuring performance in general? And if we do need to take disciplinary action, are we supported? So the primary method of communicating policy is through the policy statement. This is a top-level commitment, and it provides the mandate for all other staff to follow. But the policy statement, it can be supported by other methods of communication, such as the driver action card, the driver handbook, or the notice board posters, toolbox talks, staff briefings. But basically, don't just leave it to a flat PDF on the intranet site and expect people to read it. Finally, as I said, I am a representative of FORS, the FORS Technical Advisor. We have some great tools and toolkits within FORS, and in particular, with regard to this topic, we have the Collision Management Toolkit. Within that toolkit, we have example policy statements, toolbox talks, driver action cards, and a series of forms that can be directly lifted and used within your organisation, or they can be used to inform your own documentation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
We've now come to the end of the formal presentations, and it's now time for our Q&A session. Please do put forward your questions using the chat box. But before we begin the Q&A session, I'd just like to, first of all, thank you for engaging in today's poll. So the question was, are you currently using telematics systems to record data about crashes involving your vehicles? The results indicate that 68% said yes and 32% said no. So what I would like to do is just invite Jonathan Bates from Mixed Telematics to comment on this. So what are your thoughts on the results of this poll?
I think it's interesting. There's two elements that I just want to comment on. The first is that basically says that 2/3 of the companies that are participated in this are currently using telematics. The real key for me is twofold. The first is that really you can't manage what you don't measure. So it's absolutely crucial to be making data-driven decisions using things like telematics in order to truly understand what's happening to vehicles, but also drivers. And maybe the second element is really the quality and the composition of that telematics system. So I do wonder whether in all of those cases, is it really data about the vehicle, or does it include driver behavior information? and even camera systems, I suppose. So there's obviously a lot of different levels and tiers to telematics, but it's very interesting. It probably reflects as well the real adoption rate of basic telematics, at least in the UK market. So it's not entirely unexpected.
Brilliant, thank you. What we'll do now then, Jonathan, is just ask you some questions. Obviously, you showed us the heat mapping analysis in your presentation. How simple or complicated is it to carry that out?
Really, it's quite simple, so I'll explain how it works. All of the data that we take in for one of our customers' fleets, let's say, is stored in the mixed telematics database for that customer, and then we have some business intelligence tools which we call Mix Insight Agility, where it's quite easy just to manipulate that data into elements like the heat mapping that you can see. So you can select what period of time you want to see whichever events for mapped geographically like that. And of course, because all of the events that we record have both a geographical and a timestamp, it's very, very simple to superimpose those automatically using an algorithm in our Mix Insight Agility tool onto that heat map. If that doesn't sound simple enough, then we also have a team of fleet consultants that work with most of our key customers in order to help them set up that kind of stuff to begin with. So really the idea is to put the tools in the hands of our customers, but also show them how to set it up and also provide ongoing support. So when you combine the fact that it is easy to do anyway in the tool with the support elements we provide, it's very straightforward indeed.
Brilliant, thank you. A second question, so what do you consider the single most important benefit of data recording systems to communicate to other people in your organisation?
Okay, well, the most important benefit is of seeing over time a reduction in incident rates within a customer. I think that's certainly the most rewarding part of what we do at Mix, is to understand how we're able to help over a period of time to really help our customers solve those kind of problems. So that's the ultimate benefit. And how you do that's really hidden in the question that whoever's asked that. The communication is absolutely key in the organisation. What we find is that it's crucial to put that data in the hands of the right people in the companies, and it can be different data that is needed at different levels within the organisation. So it's really important that the driver, they see their own data. So we provide tools that both concisely and anonymously, so that none of the other drivers can see it. Each driver can actually see their own data, and they can see how they're improving over time, which is really important. What we also find is the driver supervisors are really key, because they get an overview and they're really responsible for helping the drivers improve those safety behaviours over time. So it's important that they have that information, and it really feeds up in a pyramid all the way to the top of the organisation, that we provide the right tools at the right levels. And as I said in my presentation, the ultimate aim is that all the drivers and every individual goes home safely to their families every day. That's really the ultimate benefit of what we're trying to achieve with the data.
Exactly. So another question that has come in whilst we've just been speaking is the heat mapping a global option?
Yes, it is absolutely. So one of the things about Mix is, although not everyone will have heard of us in the UK, we are a global company. We're in with one of the top 5 in terms of the number of customers' vehicles that we look after worldwide. So we do have absolute reams of data from across the world, and within our system, of course, it's all anonymized whenever we start doing any comparators geographically, but indeed we do have that data globally, and we do work with customers in over 120 countries. So we do have that data, and we also split it by different sector of fleet company as well. So for example, we could see differences between customers in things like transport and logistics versus bus and coach or field service companies. So we can get all that information, and we can slice it and dice it, and indeed we use that to help our customers during the setup process.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Jonathan. So we have had another question come in. Are other companies encountering legal and GDPR issues with cameras in vehicles and the storage and retention and the ability to provide data if a request is made by the police or the public? So this particular fleet have over 1,400 vehicles which they operate.
Obviously, we work with lots of different customers around the world, and indeed in Europe. and data protection legislation has been even stronger in some of the other countries we work in, such as France and Germany, for many years. And we've been selling dual-facing camera solutions for a number of years now. So indeed, we've had to help with most of our biggest clients. There can be strong driver union presences, or there can be whole committees of people that need all that GDPR stuff to be signed off before you can implement the cameras. So we do have a lot of experience there. We provide support for that to those customers, and what we do is we make sure that we show that the products are GDPR approved is the first thing. So only the people who need that data in order to perform their job role have access to that type of information. So if, for example, with cameras, what we've been able to do with some of our customers who've been challenged is to say, well, because it's an event-driven camera system, you're only sending footage when a particular safety event occurs. What you're not doing is sending lots of data that's not relevant to actually measuring a particular incident origin. You're just sending the data that's really pertinent to that incident. So clearly there's a defined business purpose for having that data, which is one of the crucial things with GDPR. You've got to prove that it's a defined and relevant business purpose. But in some countries there is legislation that really prohibits the driver-facing camera. So it's really understanding what the legislative framework is in a particular country. But we do have some multinational customers who've implemented camera solutions in different countries in slightly different ways. So some of them have the dual-facing cameras in the United Kingdom. For example, we're working with a company called Wincanton in the UK who've got the camera system. And we went through that process with them with respect to GDPR compliance. And it's also about briefing the drivers. So we help our clients brief the drivers, and it's really about gaining the buy-in from the drivers on day one. And the whole point is that we're trying to stop these awful incidents from occurring. So as long as we're able to prove why the cameras are being used, and we help our customers with that, then you can overcome those barriers. It doesn't have to be a complete blocker to moving forward in the world. That's not what the data protection legislation is for. The other thing, of course, is that it's important that all of that information is stored in a database that is segregated. So, of course, all of our customers have separate databases where their data is stored. So no other customer can see any of that personal information. And indeed, we set up the roles and permissions on a very granular level for each tier of individual within the organisation. So nobody has access to data that they don't need in order to perform their job role in respect of personal information for safety. So a combination of those factors is together. I could provide further information after this call to anybody that wants any specifics. I'm happy to do that, Sarah.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we'll wrap up the questions there. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar. We hope you enjoyed it and that the webinar has equipped you with useful information that will help you to work towards our common goal, which is safe and healthy mobility in fleets. To view our upcoming webinars, please visit globalfleetchampions.org. Thank you very much to all of today's speakers and presenters. We really appreciate the time and effort you put into your presentations, and also, of course, to our sponsor, Mix Telematics, for your support. We hope you can join us again soon, and thank you very much.